Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to try and unravel a mystery that honestly sits at the heart of everything we read. It's one of those questions that seems so simple at first, but it has had philosophers scratching their heads for centuries. Where does meaning actually come from?
I mean, really think about that for a second. When you read something, where is the meaning? Is it, locked away in the author's brain? Does it just pop into your head out of nowhere? Or is it hiding somewhere else completely? That's the core puzzle we're going to get into today. You see, for a really, really long time, the story of meaning was, it was a story of captivity. The text itself wasn't seen as free. It was more like a prisoner, totally bound to whatever its creator intended. This was what we'd call the author's era.
Yeah, for centuries, the answer was super straightforward. A text was basically just a container, right? A vessel designed to carry one specific idea from the author's mind straight into the reader's. That meaning, it was their exclusive property. End of story.
This whole approach, championed by thinkers like Schleiermacher and Dilthey, turned reading into a kind of archaeology. Your job as the reader wasn't to create anything, or even really interpret. It was to dig. You had to excavate the author's life story, the historical context they lived in, their psychology, all to unearth that single, true meaning they supposedly buried inside the text.
And then, everything changed. In the 20th century, this revolutionary idea just explodes onto the scene, the death of the author. Now, obviously not literally, but it completely shattered this idea that the author had total, absolute control. Suddenly, the text escaped its captivity. It was free. But this new freedom created a really fascinating problem. If the author isn't the king anymore, who or what is in charge of meaning?
So, this liberation of the text, it kicked off this, you could call it a philosophical civil war. 3 major schools of thought popped up, and each one had a completely different answer to our big question. Let's break them down.
So first up, you've got the old guard, right? The author-centric view. Even after it wasn't the top dog anymore, it didn't just vanish. This approach still argues that when you get right down to it, the most authentic meaning is the one the author originally intended to put there.
Then you've got the rebels. People like Wolfgang Iser came along and said, hold on a second, a text is actually incomplete. They argued it's full of gaps and things that are left unsaid. So meaning isn't in the text waiting to be found. It's actually created in that moment of reading, when you, the reader, bring your own life, your experiences, your expectations to fill in those gaps. The reader becomes a co-creator. And finally, we get to the most radical view of them all, the post-structuralists. They basically said the author and the reader are both kind of missing the point. Meaning isn't in anyone's head. It's generated by the text itself, this endless, interconnected web of words, signs, and structures. In this view, meaning is always shifting and changing, in a process that the philosopher Jacques Derrida called différance, where words just point to other words, but you never get to some final, stable truth. This is Derrida's super famous and often really misunderstood quote. He didn't mean that, chairs and tables don't exist. What he meant was that once we start trying to understand something, we can only do it through language, through the text. Everything becomes part of this huge linguistic system, and there's no ultimate anchor for meaning outside of it. So here's the battleground laid out nice and clear. On one side, meaning is a historical artifact, something stuck in the author's mind. On another, it's a personal, creative event happening in the reader's experience. And on the third side, it's this impersonal, always shifting process inside language itself. And here's the kicker. For decades, these 3 paths seemed completely at war. You pretty much had to pick a side. But what if you didn't have to choose? A new approach started to emerge, one that tried to build a bridge between these warring camps. It suggested the answer wasn't either or, but maybe all of the above. This is where the philosopher Paul Ricoeur comes in with this brilliant way out of the deadlock. He argued that meaning isn't some static object you can pinpoint in a single place, not just in the author or the reader or the text. No, he proposed that meaning is a dynamic journey, a process that involves all 3. Ricoeur saw this journey as a 3-step cycle. Okay, so it starts in the author's world, right? It's born from their life and experiences, but the second it's written down, the text becomes independent. He had a fancy term for this, hermeneutical distanciation. It basically breaks free from the author and creates its own world. Then, finally, a reader enters that world, and the fusion of the text's world with the reader's world creates something totally new and enriched understanding. It's this continuous, life-giving loop. So the takeaway from Ricoeur's whole idea is just incredibly powerful. Meaning is a relationship. It's an event. It's something that happens in the space between the author, the text, and the reader. It's a living, breathing conversation.
And this brings us to a really profound shift in how we can think about all of this. We move away from this hunt for a single, final answer, and instead learn to just embrace an ongoing, open-ended process.
When you get right down to it, this whole journey shows us that a text isn't a treasure chest with one piece of gold inside. It's more like a musical score. The notes are right there on the page, sure, but it only truly comes to life when a musician, the reader, performs it, bringing their own unique style and breathing new life into it every single time. And really, this is the idea I'd love to leave you with. Every single time you open a book or read an article, you're not just downloading information, you are entering into a dialogue. The text is asking you a question, and your act of reading is itself a part of the answer.